Insper sempre foi uma referência, não ainda pelo que ela significava do ponto de vista acadêmico, mas pela ideia inicial, pela maneira como o Cláudio Haddad instituiu, pelas pessoas que ele estava colocando em volta. E foi uma surpresa excepcional saber que o Brasil já estava fazendo alguma coisa assim e que de alguma maneira estava ao alcance das mãos.
O nosso programa de bolsas tem crescido muito nesses últimos 15 anos e hoje a gente tem que estar bem mais robusto, né? Porque os nossos bolsistas, os nossos alunos, eles têm suporte de diversas naturezas, né? Para aqueles que são de fora de São Paulo, tem um auxílio moradia. Para todos, tem um auxílio de custo. Os alunos têm um suporte do Multi-Insper, que ouve, procura entender quais são os dilemas, as dificuldades que eles vivem. Então hoje o programa, ele não oferece só uma educação de qualidade, mas ele dá também um apoio, um suporte grande para que ele possa ter o melhor desempenho possível dentro da escola.
E eu espero que o programa de bolsas esteja apenas começando, porque é claro que todos nós aqui temos um limite, mas ele de fato cria, enfim, impactos mais que proporcionais.
Tem que pensar grande, tem que sonhar. Quanto mais jovens a gente forma, né, quanto maior a oferta, né, de um programa desse para esses jovens, maior o impacto potencial no nosso país.
Obrigada. A todos, bem-vindos aqui ao nosso evento de empreendedorismo e inovação nas empresas familiares. So welcome everyone to our Insper Talks. Tonight we're going to talk about entrepreneurship and innovation in family business. And I would like to start by welcoming all of our guests here tonight. So first of all, I would like to introduce two experts in the subject of entrepreneurship and family business. So please welcome Judy Lin Walsh. So Judy is a principal at BanyanGlobal, and she has been working with family business for almost a decade. Judy has written many articles on the topic of family business, and one article talks a lot about entrepreneurship and how to foster entrepreneurship in family business. And this is one of the topics that she'll discuss with us tonight. So hello, Judy. Thank you for being here.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to see you. Thank you for having us.
And also, I would like to introduce Nick DiLoreto. So Nick is also a principal at BanyanGlobal. Like Judy, he has been in the field of family business for many years and supported families in the US and other parts of the globe in their challenges, including how to prepare for succession and next generation. And that goes to the topic of entrepreneurship in the next generation, or to how to keep your family with this entrepreneurial vibe. Okay. So thank you. Hello, Nick.
Evening. Thanks, Aline. It's wonderful to be here.
Thank you. And I would also like to introduce, and I'll switch to Portuguese now. Vou apresentar o Ricardo Amaro e o João Amaro. Queria agradecer a presença dos dois. O Ricardo e o João são alunos do Insper, membros de uma empresa familiar e empreendedores, né? Então, eles combinam aqui um ponto de encontro super bacana e fizeram a gentileza de estar conosco hoje para falar sobre a experiência deles como empreendedores no mundo de uma empresa familiar. Obrigada, Ricardo e João. Querem falar um oi?
Hi, everyone. It's a big pleasure to be here. A gente que tem que agradecer o convite. A gente achou que era para a gente aprender, falaram que é para a gente falar um pouco, então vai ser um prazer.
Boa noite, pessoal. Obrigado, Aline, mais uma vez pelo convite. Espero que a gente consiga traduzir, passar um pouquinho da nossa experiência aqui.
Great. So a couple of logistics for everyone that is in this event. So you can use the Zoom chat if you want to ask questions. At this point of our lives with post-COVID, everybody should be used to Zoom, but if you have any questions, let us know. You can also open your microphone and ask your questions directly to either the panel or to Ricardo and João. You can ask them in English or in Portuguese. We can translate if you want to. So feel free to comment, ask questions, dialogue, okay? So ready to start this conversation? It's basically Insper Talks because it's not a presentation. We'll dialogue, we'll have a conversation on the topic. So to kick things off, the idea is to ask Judy and Nick a couple of questions about entrepreneurship and the impact of entrepreneurship in family business. And I think I would like to start with a fundamental question, Judy and Nick. So why is entrepreneurship such a hot topic in family business? Why is this so many people speak about it or talk about it, and why is this so important?
It's a great question, Aline. It's something that Judy and I have looked into quite a bit as we've worked with families to help navigate transition and to help work on entrepreneurship and next generation. And perhaps we'll start by setting some context here, which is, I think everyone knows that entrepreneurship isn't a new thing, right? People finding new ways to allocate resources and do great things with what they have has been around since the dawn of time. You know, be it a better mousetrap or a better way to conduct business, it's been around. But what you might not know is that the term entrepreneurship hasn't actually been in the lexicon for much more than 200 years. The term was actually introduced in the 1800s, if you can believe that, by a French economist. And it really didn't become popular until the early 20th century with another economist named Joseph Schumpeter. So if it's been around forever, but it's just now becoming a hot topic, I think the question is what's changed, right? And I think the best explanation for that is it's become a thing. It's become popular, right? It's next generation many next generation, I guess we could say, don't dream of becoming, or don't dream as much of becoming a doctor or a lawyer anymore. I have 3 young girls at home, and what they say is, I want to be an entrepreneur, right? That's what people dream to do, or more and more people are dreaming to do. And part of that is the rise of technology and the rise of unicorns like Facebook and WhatsApp and Zoom, the platform we're on right now. Part of it is pop culture, and part of it is the business schools are picking it up. So it's become a thing, but it can become a thing and potentially not be a thing for family business. But it's also really important in family businesses, that at least what Judy and I are seeing right now. And different families have different reasons for trying to promote entrepreneurialism. But what I guess I would say is part of it is adapting, right? Part of it is family businesses and their owners trying to disrupt, not be disruptive, right? Part of it is trying to build that better mousetrap, if you will. And part of it is a next generation that's been raised to I don't know if lionize is the right word, but to really look up to entrepreneurs. And so it is a hot topic. It's an increasingly hot topic, but it's also an increasingly important one for family businesses who are looking to sustain across generations.
Thank you, Nick. And if this is such an important element of our reality and the future, and like such a buzzword, such a presence, and such an aspirations for many individuals, why is it so hard to sustain entrepreneurship and innovation in family businesses?
Well, where I'd start there is it's hard to sustain entrepreneurship, period.
Okay.
It's interesting. I'm reading a book to my daughters by an author, a professor of organizational behavior at Wharton, named Adam Grant, he talks about this idea of leaf. Leaf is a leaf in an oak tree and doesn't want to fall down to the ground, and tries a whole bunch of things to try and avoid falling down to the ground, and highlights all of the challenges that even basic entrepreneurs face. Like, how do I get ideas? How do I sustain in the face of failure? How do I know that I'm actually going somewhere? So that's table stakes, if you will, for how to be an entrepreneur. But in a family business, gosh, it's exponentially harder, right? And there are many reasons for that. The first one is sort of, where do I start, right? If I've got this great family business, how do I leverage that into what I would like to do? And how do I actually start? Who do I ask for funding? Where do I get ideas? How do I separate myself from the business? Second is, how do I avoid coming across as entitled, right? Next generation in family business are in a wonderfully challenging position, right? Because they have the resources to pursue these entrepreneurial goals. But there's always these perceptions that maybe they're advantaged, or maybe they're doing it just because they were able to, or just because of the resources that they had. Maybe they're not real entrepreneurs. There's also this idea of, what if I fail, right? I come from a long line of families or family business that has been successful across 1, 2, or 3 generations. Am I going to be the one that is not successful across the board? And if I am, what does that mean for me? What does that mean for our family? And many of them say to us, well, I've got the spark, but it'd be so much easier to go into the family business. And maybe I should just do that. Maybe I shouldn't even start. So sustaining or challenges to sustaining have many different dimensions, and those are just a few. But the ones that are successful, boy, do they do great things.
Interesting. And João and Ricardo will tell us their story, but do you guys, like Judy and Nick, feel that can we cultivate entrepreneurs in the next generations of family business, or it's just like genetic, or some people have it and some people just don't? How would you describe this phenomenon of becoming an entrepreneur or raising an entrepreneur, let's say?
Aline, I love that question. Because if you think about successful family businesses, every single one of them started with an entrepreneur. Whether they knew it or called themselves that or not, but they were a risk taker and they started that. And to Nick's point too, a lot of what happens in later generations is there's a sense of, well, do I need to take that big risk? And what you hear a lot from founders is, well, I had to. I had no other choice. It was that or poverty. It was that or have nothing. So they had to work really hard to do that. And what we hear in a lot of later generation families is, how do we now, like, we don't want to bring you back to point zero, right? And have you start with nothing again. That's a false reality. But how can we make sure that you still have that fire, that entrepreneurial drive to go out and do it? It's not a gene. It's not a gene. Just because somebody in your history had the ability to create an amazing business doesn't mean that everybody in the family has that same spark, has that same whatever. It doesn't mean that if you don't have that in your past, that you can't do it yourself, right? So I don't think it's genetic, but I do think that there are certain things that you can promote to make sure that people try hard and try to promote their entrepreneurialism and take those chances instead of just taking the safe way route, because they do have other options at this point.
And in your experience, Judy and Nick, are there wrong ways to cultivate entrepreneurship, and on the other hand, best practice that you could share with us?
Yeah, also such a good question. I think we've seen two primary approaches to cultivating entrepreneurship. There's this one approach that we see in a lot of families, which is, if you build it, they will come. So if I design a very beautifully thought out, elaborate program to support entrepreneurs, I have a new venture program, I invite all of my next gen family members to do it, and I've got, then you will naturally become phenomenal entrepreneurs. But as anybody knows, like Facebook, for every Facebook, there are 100,000 startups that tried and failed, right? It's not just because you had a great idea. Sometimes it's opportunity, it's luck, it's hard work, it's all these things that happen. So it's not just if you build it, you're going to have an entrepreneur who just naturally, genetically has that ability. And the other thing that a lot of people say, well, you have more advantages than the founder did. You have all these things. You should just be able to do this. You should just do it. And that also sets a false expectation. There's just this pressure to feel like you have to all of a sudden go from 0 to 100. And what you don't hear often enough about the starting entrepreneur is how many times they failed before they got there. So I think that those are some of the two biggest things that we see that people get wrong, is this idea of like, we're going to design something beautiful and therefore it's going to happen. Or you should just be able to do it. And I'm going to give you no support, just this incredibly high expectation.
If I could, it's interesting, Judy, that you mention it that way. I have families that we've worked with who the common refrain is, if you want to be an entrepreneur, go be an entrepreneur, right? To Judy's second point, don't talk about it. Don't ask these questions. Go out and do it and figure it out for yourselves. And that can be off-putting just as much as building a superstructure that the next generation hasn't had any input in or any part in designing can be just as off-putting. So, in their best intentions, in these cases, the senior generation can, instead of trying to cultivate it, it's, pushing people away, which is sad because they're trying to do the best. They just don't know how to actually approach it in a way that bridges that generational gap, if you will.
And have you found, or do you have any ideas or practice of how to find this middle ground and not be into one of those two extremes that you guys described it?
Yes, absolutely. So we Nick and I have done a bunch of research just looking at our client families. We've also worked with a colleague of ours, Sam Brule, on a couple of articles, one in Harvard Business Review and in a few other places. But we've as we look across our client base, we've learned that there's no right way. So Aline mentioned best practices. There's no best practice, golden bullet, this is going to happen. But what we found is we look across, we see themes. So the successful families who have, they're not the shirt sleeves in 3 generations. They're the ones who, you have this great idea and you have another great idea and another great idea, and you're still able to continually innovate. They have this balanced approach, and we've identified 4 foundations for it. So we'll kind of just talk you through those quickly. One, we started to talk about, so communicating your stories well. The key point here is don't gloss over the hardships. So, when you talk about whoever started your legacy family business or previous successes, don't just look like they got from point A to point B, nothing to tremendous success. Talk about all the failures along the way. So we had this one founder who, he started an incredibly successful wine business. And what he would always tell his grandchildren and his children was, when I first started this, I went bankrupt 3 times. I started this, and then, I had this great idea. I thought I was on to this perfect blend. We had a bad frost. It was over. And then I had to beg the banks, like, just give me, a little bit of a loan, give me I'll do whatever it takes. And then because of that gritty, it was hard. He almost lost it several times. And then you go and you fail again, fail again. That's the important part. It's not just this fairy tale, right? So don't gloss over the hardships. Tell the hard stories. We find that people don't do that enough. But if you can impart how hard it is and not just the expectation that it's going to go well, then you're setting up future generations for success. That's foundation 1. 2, and Nick touched on this, is about structures. So, it doesn't have to be completely elaborate. Let me give you a beautiful program, tie it with a bow, but you want to have clear expectations. If you are a family that has had business experience and has had some success with that, you are in a position to be able to provide some sort of support to your aspiring entrepreneur. So, but what are the expectations for what that support looks like? It could be a lot of support. It could be no support. It could be somewhere in between. You could also have, so Ricardo and Joao are brothers, right? And you probably have more family members. So, what if Ricardo has this great idea and Joao has another great idea? How do you give support to each in a way that they feel is fair, right? And oftentimes what we find doesn't happen often enough is this cross-generational dialogue. So it's not just the parents saying, okay, well, we hold the pocketbooks and we've got the business expertise and now we're going to tell you what to do. No, it's a dialogue, right? So Ricardo, Joao, what would be helpful? Okay, what do you think that you could provide? And go back and forth.
Judy, if I could there, I want to build on that idea a little bit. And the idea is, we talk about the concept of process before people, if you will. And what that means is it's easier to have structures in place before you're actually talking about someone. So it's easier to be clear about how entrepreneurial ideas are going to be evaluated. It's easier to have conversations about how they're going to be funded if we're talking about it in the abstract. What if there were a next generation that wants to do this? What if there were this great idea, but we have these constraints? So talking about it in terms of process, how would we do it if this situation came up, is so much easier than saying, oh, we're going to do it this way. And some may perceive, oh, that's just for Ricardo and Joao, right? They got special treatment, as opposed to, no, we actually agreed on how it's going to work in advance. And everyone's bought in. Not just, to build on Judy's point, cross-generational dialogue, of course, but even broadly beyond cross-generational dialogue, that senior generation who are thinking about their next generation and, not worrying about, are we playing favorites with them or with them, but creating that decision process and that structures and those policies to make it work so that the people don't get in the way of great ideas, if you will.
Got it.
Great. Totally agree, Nick. The other thing that we found is about support. So structure important, story is phenomenal, but support. So you have to calibrate it. This is a Goldilocks problem. There is such a thing as too much support and too little support, right? So the things that we've seen that successful families do is you test for viability. Is it just, oh, I had an idea, great, let me pull out my checkbook and here you go, blank check? No. What is the business? Help test that business idea first before you put any money on the table, right? What's the idea? What's the return? What's your business case? What's your business plan? What's your market? Who's your audience? Really, like, if you have family members who have the benefit of business expertise, use that intellectual and emotional expertise to your advantage, right? Don't be afraid of it. Harness as much as you can. And we would also say, think about non-financial benefits. It's not just about the money, right? If you have a good enough idea, you can get funding from anywhere. You can get funding from Silicon Valley. There's so many investors out there. That's not what the family part is. That's the extra edge that you can give, is about things like what you bring from your decades of experience that other people, outsiders, you wouldn't give that. You wouldn't share that with somebody besides family. And then the other last point that we would say is just don't micromanage it. And this is so hard for people who are successful business people, is there's an idea of like, oh, Ricardo and Joao have this amazing idea. Great. Let's all jump in, and slowly you see the idea is not necessarily the originator's idea, but it kind of gets taken over. So how do you set like enough that you're getting the wisdom almost like at a board level, but not so much that you don't have too many cooks in the kitchen? So that's one on support. And then the last one I'll just say is give them space, right? And as aspiring entrepreneurs, also like make sure that you set aside your space too, right? A lot of family businesses, to Nick's point earlier, they want the next generation to come into the legacy family business. They want it to continue. So there's almost this pressure expectation. But if you have somebody who has this brilliant idea and really wants to carve their own path, let them do that. They could go and have tremendous experiences and then bring some of that back to the business later, or they could not, but you should kind of give them that freedom to do it. And to Nick's point, allow them to fail, give them chances. Like the situations now, like I always think about the story or, the Hermes family, right? You think about them now, you think about leather handbags, right? Maybe you think about scarves, but where that actually came from is the legacy story. He was an innkeeper. He lost his family. He had no other choice but to make something. And he actually started as an apprentice for horse saddles. Okay. So back in the day, he's making horse saddles with leather. If somebody hadn't innovated in that family along the way, they would still be making horse saddles. This is not the same business. So those are some of our best guidance based on our experiences.
If I could, I just want to offer two things. One of my favorite stories is about allowing the next generation to fail. There's a family that we know in the States that gave their next generation a large sum of money to invest together. And over time, they invested it. And unfortunately, they lost it all of it, relatively quickly in the span of a year or two. But the patriarch and matriarch of that family say that that's the best money they ever spent. And why do they say that? Because the next generation learned what it feels like to work together, learn how to go through the tough times together. And interestingly enough, for this family, that next generation was given another chance, and they made enough money to buy out their parents through their own investments. But all the way back to the beginning, they have the stories. They have their own story now that they can share with the next generation, which is failing and succeeding and what both feel like and why it's important to bring people together. One last thing I want to offer is we've got the pillars here. I like to use a sports analogy when we talk about this as well. And I'm a soccer player, so I'll use a soccer analogy here. And that is, think about each of these pillars as a skill, right? One pillar is your right foot. Are you strong with your right foot? One pillar is your left foot. Are you strong with your left foot? One pillar is your head, both heading and your knowledge of the game. And one pillar is your stamina. Not everyone's going to have the same skill level, but working on each of these things makes you a complete soccer player, right? And in this case, working on each of these things will help you to cultivate entrepreneurship in your next generation. You don't need to be perfect at all of them, but you need to be sure that you're focusing on each, at least to some extent, so that you're a strong player on the field.
Excellent. I think those pillars can basically give sort of like a set of pathways that added can combine for a great experience and for like very good development of entrepreneurship from one generation to the other, as Judy explained. And we have several people with us here in the call, and also some folks watching us through YouTube. If they wanted to know how well they're doing right now, their families are doing, like if you want to talk about entrepreneurship with your families, if they want to talk about entrepreneurship with their families, or if they want to sort of like understand, like, are we doing the right things or not? Do you guys have any suggestions, any ideas you can share?
We do. It's a great question. So, I mean, we talk about balance, right? So like as Nick said, you might be naturally already doing some of these things incredibly well. And maybe there's one or two that you're not doing. So, or as well. So what we look at is, we think about it like a scorecard too. And this is just a way to start a conversation, right? You don't want to just say, hey, mom and dad, or my uncles, I've scored us this way, right? But hey, I had this great Insper talk, and these guys kind of said, well, they asked us a series of questions and asked me to rate how I think our family is doing on a scale of green, we're doing this really well, yellow, we're kind of doing it, or red, we're not really doing this. This is an area that's a miss, right? So we took these questions and you kind of score, and we'll ask Ricardo and Joao if they wouldn't mind sharing their experience. You kind of score across. There's no perfect score, right? It's just a question of like, oh, we're actually doing pretty well, or oh, there's a few things that we're kind of missing on. Maybe we should can we talk about ways to really strengthen how we're able to use our intellectual, and business expertise. Help me make sure this is a really good business idea before I go forward and fall flat on my face, right? So we suggest this scorecard. You just rank each of your answers, and we'll ask you all we'll poll and see what your responses are. And then just use it as a starting point to have a conversation. You could also be surprised if Ricardo could answer this one way and Joao could have a totally different perspective, and then you can talk about it.
I think that's the best part, Judy. This is, like you said, there's no right or wrong answer, but finding out where you're aligned or where you're not is really what can lead to the important conversations about what you want to work on as a family, and potentially what you want to learn about, right? If you go to that first question, which is, do we share real stories about entrepreneurship? So we find it to be super useful and frankly, super fun to launch those conversations as well.
Great. So I'll switch to Portuguese so I can be more direct and explain. So, para todo mundo que está aqui no grupo com a gente, né, pessoal que está ouvindo, participando aí, nós colocamos aqui no chat uma pesquisa que vocês podem clicar para responder justamente esse scorecard, tá? Então, nosso pedido é se vocês puderem agora mesmo, ao vivo e a cores, vamos fazer ao vivo, tá? Se todos vocês que estão aqui nos ouvindo puderem entrar aqui no chat, clicar nesse link e responder a pesquisa, no final a gente vai aprender um pouquinho com os resultados do grupo, tá legal? Então, vamos lá. Ao mesmo tempo, a gente vai continuar o nosso papo aqui com... agora em português, com o Ricardo e com o João. Então, Ricardo e João, obrigada. So, Judy and Nick, we asked everyone to fill in the survey, and I told them at the end we'll summarize the main results. We'll go back to you guys, but now we're talking to Ricardo and João a little bit, okay? And I'll do some of the translation so that everybody is up to speed. So, Ricardo e João, conta um pouquinho pra gente da história empreendedora de vocês, assim. O que é o negócio de vocês, o quão parecido ou diferente ele é do negócio da empresa familiar de vocês. Se vocês puderem falar um pouquinho aí da história de vocês.
Quer começar?
Claro, começa você que tem mais... A história começou com ele, de fato, assim, uma demanda real, então a gente sempre gosta de iniciar contando essa historinha, a gente fala que é um pouco clichê que a gente sempre conta, mas fica um pouco mais palpável.
Eu vou contar um pouquinho, né, do que aconteceu, que foi onde existiu essa divisão muito bem escrita, inclusive do que os dois estavam falando antes, do Nick e de Judy, falando sobre essa escolha entre já ir direto para a empresa familiar ou não, seguir esse caminho. E foi realmente de uma demanda ali que um amigo nosso pediu socorro de falta de gasolina e surgiu a nossa ideia de abrir uma startup de delivery de combustível e energia. Mas foi nesse ponto que a gente trouxe para dentro de casa a ideia e conversou com os nossos pais, porque realmente a gente estava muito nesse processo familiar de ter uma experiência fora, mas a ideia era participar de alguns estágios, algumas coisas voltadas para a área da saúde, que tem a ver com o negócio familiar. Então, esse seria o traço natural, e acabou ali aos 45 do segundo tempo, né, que era onde a gente deveria estar procurando algum estágio, surgindo essa oportunidade, e a gente trouxe para dentro de casa essa possibilidade da gente levantar essa startup, e é muito engraçado porque a gente está vendo ali os dois comentarem bastante dos pensamentos que a gente passou, né, um pouquinho da história que eles contaram, inclusive dessa analogia que o Nick fez de futebol e tudo mais. Eu costumo traçar uma outra, eu costumo falar da bicicleta, eu já cheguei a te contar um pouco, Aline, vou contar um pouco aqui, que eu vejo muito que a nossa família tá ali atrás da gente aprendendo a andar de bicicleta. Então começa com a rodinha, a gente bastante dentro de casa, contando bastante da história, mas sempre tendo auxílio ali de trás dos familiares, nas primeiras pedaladas, e essa segurança que a gente tem ali, inclusive, de histórias lá de trás sobre empreendedorismo, que sempre teve nessa nossa mesa de jantar, até realmente nos soltar e criar essas asas. Então, tirar as rodinhas da bicicleta e soltar a gente para pedalar sozinho, mas a nossa intenção é realmente estar depois próximo à nossa família, só que a gente achava super importante ter uma trilha sozinho antes, né? Sozinho, mas querendo ou não, em dupla aqui, o que já dá um outro suporte, mas foi super importante para a gente, está sendo super importante para a gente essa jornada, né?
E também trazendo aí mais uma coisa que a Judy disse, realmente o suporte ele vai muito além do financeiro, não se resume, quando você fala, um suporte familiar, você já pensa em um dinheiro da família que você possa usar, mas vai muito além disso, até porque a gente sabe que dinheiro, existe hoje bastante liquidez no mercado, e então, desde um suporte emocional até prático, de você poder, né, compartilhar seus problemas do dia a dia, até com network, enfim, é um espectro bem amplo, né? Mas, então, eu e meu irmão, a gente está nessa empreitada já faz mais ou menos 1 ano e meio, 2 anos, com essa solução de delivery de combustível, né, nos Estados Unidos, enfim, mundo afora, Canadá, França, a solução já existe, e aqui a gente está tentando trazer para o Brasil. Hoje tem 2 empresas basicamente que fazem isso, e a gente busca vender né, o combustível com essa cultura de delivery, tanto para a pessoa física quanto para a pessoa jurídica.
Então a gente estava saindo ali de algo que realmente a gente sempre esteve muito envolvido, que é a área hospitalar, e caiu no mercado de combustível e energia, E é algo bem parrudo, né? A gente até costuma brincar que a gente está em oceano azul, só que a gente está nesse oceano com o pessoal de 60, 70 anos. Então, o que meu irmão estava falando desse apoio emocional também foi muito importante para a gente, né? Voltando à analogia da bicicleta, a gente sabia que se a gente caísse, ia ter alguém para passar o metiolate na gente ali, para colocar um curativo. A gente sabe ao mesmo tempo que daqui a pouco não vai ter esse alguém. Tanto na nossa startup, quanto no legado familiar. A gente sabe muito bem disso, mas a gente achava super importante, a gente acha muito importante a gente saber pedalar sozinho, a gente saber cair sozinho, um ajudar o outro a levantar, mas se tiver ali com machucado tem que seguir, porque realmente é complicado, a gente acaba saindo com uma felicidade muito grande que o nosso conselho, a gente brinca, é a nossa mesa de jantar. Então, muitas vezes a gente vem conversar com a família e pega bastante da experiência, ou às vezes só de falar, né, e saber que tem alguém escutando, mas muitas das vezes não só com contatos, mas com conselhos do que fazer, do que já aconteceu, e criando os paralelos do futuro, né, de quando a gente estiver próximo do negócio familiar, é muito importante, é uma experiência que a gente se sente muito mais seguro, né?
Sim, até porque a gente nunca teve então, para finalizar, até porque a gente nunca teve uma experiência fora, né, no mercado de trabalho, de fato. Então, contar com esse suporte, por mais que você, ali fazendo a analogia com meu irmão, você não caia da bicicleta, você saber que você tem esse suporte é muito importante.
E conta uma coisa, João e Ricardo, assim, vocês se sentiram na obrigação de empreender por causa das histórias que vocês ouviam? Como é que era essa coisa das histórias? Assim, teve esse balanço que a Judy e Nick falaram entre os sucessos e os fracassos? Como é que foi essa coisa do legado para vocês?
Sim, começa. Então, acho que assim, a veia empreendedora começou, na verdade, com o nosso avô, que era médico, se formou no Rio de Janeiro, veio para São Paulo, e ele tinha o sonho de ter ali, então, um hospital, uma maternidade, e diante desse sonho ele convidou, enfim, se juntou com mais 20 pessoas, e durante esse processo, até o negócio prosperar, as pessoas foram saindo, e ele é o que mais acreditou, mais ficou no negócio, né, muito da resiliência, a gente teve bastante desse conceito, e, enfim, até que só ele se tornou ali a pessoa que estava tocando junto com os nossos pais. Então, eu acho que, assim, era muito mais natural, né, e imaginado que a gente fosse ser encaminhado para o negócio familiar, e não que a gente fosse se desvirtuar, não se desvirtuar completamente, mas, enfim, que a gente fosse traçar sozinhos uma carreira, né, uma carreira empreendedora. Então, assim, a oportunidade apareceu, né, nessa historinha de uma demanda de um amigo, e a gente abraçou, simplesmente. Então, eu acho que, assim, não era tão esperado que a gente fosse traçar, mas essa história, essa veia empreendedora, de fato, contribuiu para a gente.
E em questão de obrigação, né, nunca teve nada disso. Dentro da sua pergunta, nunca teve nada de uma obrigação de se jogar no mundo sozinho ou qualquer coisa. A gente poderia estar tendo essa experiência por fora, em outros momentos, outras experiências, mas o ponto é que realmente eu acho que existiu uma obrigação interna, né? Eu me sinto na obrigação, ninguém colocou essa pressão na gente, sempre foi super tranquilo, mas a gente queria criar algo nosso para sentir a dor mesmo, para sentir um pouco, não que não exista essa dor e essa pressão em outros lugares, mas eu acho que a gente sempre foi escutando, assistindo filmes sobre empreendedorismo, conversando bastante, em viagens e etc., que acabou se tornando uma obrigação minha comigo mesmo, né? Eu me pus aquilo e existe, e por exemplo, é a mesma obrigação que eu sinto, a mesma pressão de continuar o legado familiar, né? De estar ali.
Tá.
Os amigos falam, pô, e aí? Você vai continuar, né? Já com aquele né. Já é uma pressão que tem, mas assim, eu acho que a gente criou uma regra interna entre nós dois, minha irmã também, e os primos, de querer continuar, não de ter que continuar.
Tá.
O que torna todo o processo muito mais fácil. Eu imagino, eu fico pensando às vezes, se eu não gostasse do negócio, como seria? Eu acho que eu me sentiria muito mais pressionado. Porque realmente pode existir uma pressão, você olhando algo que já está na terceira, indo daqui a pouco para a quarta geração, e você tem que passar essa tocha para alguém, né? A gente tá ali naquele momento de pegar ela e depois ter que passar para alguém. Então tem um pouco disso, mas querendo ou não, bastante dessas conversas de empreendedorismo, etc., acabaram cativando a gente para querer estar lá, né? Então tem uma pressão, mas que se não existisse ia continuar a mesma coisa, porque é a nossa vontade também.
Tá, legal. E você já comentou um pouco assim, então, que tem um combinado, vamos dizer, ou pelo menos um compromisso entre vocês, né, sua irmã e os primos, de que é um querer e não um obrigar, né? E como é que é o diálogo com a geração mais sênior de vocês, assim?
É engraçado, a gente faz um trabalho, inclusive, com a Banyan, né, super interessante, que é aquele negócio de, realmente, eu acho que é muito mais preparar essa passagem do que realizar ela, né? Então, a gente vê muito no começo desse trabalho que era uma cabeça totalmente diferente do que é agora. E todo mundo tem o mesmo desejo, né? Que essa passagem seja com uma menor turbulência possível. É uma mudança muito drástica, querendo ou não, né? Meu pai, meu padrinho, quem hoje está no negócio tem 60, 70 anos, e a gente super jovem, então outras ideias, tudo mais, a gente também aprendendo, mas tem uma conversa ali muito grande, é uma sinergia muito grande, né, da vontade de todo mundo. Então, claro, tem pontos da cultura que são diferentes, de educação diferente e tudo mais, e a gente com um gás novo, mas todo mundo senta, cada um coloca a pontuação do que acha melhor, até de, e aí, deixar os meninos criarem asas em outro negócio e depois virem para cá, ou já tem que estar aqui agora?
Tá.
Porque, querendo ou não, a gente vê eles como uma escola para a gente. Mas, ao mesmo tempo, tem uma escola no mundo para a gente criar essa casca e depois estar lá dentro.
Certo.
Mas todo mundo querendo esse mesmo ponto de encontro acaba facilitando muito.
E esse diálogo aconteceu entre vocês?
Sim.
Ou está em progresso, vamos dizer assim?
Diariamente, né?
Tá. Ótimo, ótimo. E como é que vocês imaginam que é a percepção ou a reação a falhar? Primeiro, assim, o que na definição de vocês, porque eu achei bem bacana que vocês falaram essa coisa de que o apoio não vem só do dinheiro, mas eu acho que os objetivos de vocês também são muito maiores do que os financeiros, né? Vocês querem falar um pouquinho sobre isso e depois, assim, o que vocês considerariam uma falha e o que o seu pai, o seu tio, o resto da família consideraria uma falha, e se tem alinhamento com essa definição do que é falhar, né, e do que essa experiência vai trazer de benefício e de, vamos dizer, né, prejuízo, vamos dizer, para a família.
Certo. Eu acho que, assim, eu enxergo muito que hoje se tem o conceito de que falhar, né, na nossa sociedade é muito, você colocar uma ideia no mercado e não acatar, e você perder dinheiro, enfim, a sua empresa, ela falir, vamos supor. O que já é diferente, principalmente nos Estados Unidos, que tem uma cultura muito mais de olhar para esses empreendedores que já falharam e de falar, é um ponto positivo. A sua segunda tentativa, com certeza, você tem muito mais aprendizado, conhecimento para realmente fazer o negócio prosperar. Então, assim, acho que o conceito não vem de você colocar uma empresa no mercado e ela, por exemplo, falir, mas sim você não se dedicar, né? Acho que quando você tenta abrir uma empresa, uma startup, você está dando cara a tapa, você está saindo da sua zona de conforto, mas a partir do momento que você não tem o comprometimento, a dedicação para o negócio fazer dar certo, aí que eu acho que começa a entrar realmente você falhou, você não tentou. Então, acho que o importante é realmente, porque apesar de você colocar a empresa no mercado e ela não dar certo, você vai ter tido um background, vai ter tido muitas experiências que você não teria vivido, né? Se não... que não tivesse colocado.
O meu irmão comentou disso nos Estados Unidos, mas também acho que tem muito uma questão de ponto de vista, né?
Uhum.
O que é o sucesso e o que é a falha? Porque, por exemplo, se a gente fechasse a startup agora, seria uma falha tendo em vista o mundo afora, mas eu tenho certeza que para os nossos pais, para os nossos familiares, já está sendo sucesso, porque a gente já está atingindo o que eles queriam, o que vai agregar no negócio posteriormente, que é a gente se entender como pessoa de trabalho, a gente se entender como sócios também. Então, por exemplo, a gente olha e a gente conversa disso, a gente fala, pô, olha o nível de conversa que a gente já está tendo, olha o nível de pressão que a gente está tendo, acordando todo dia com um pesadelo, e que é um treinamento, querendo ou não, né? Tem pesadelo praticamente toda noite em relação ao negócio, e está sendo muito proveitoso, prazeroso participar disso tudo. E tem aquele ponto de, realmente, que a gente tinha comentado antes, que a gente não está querendo criar algo rico, algo que traga uma riqueza financeira. É até um pouco mais complicado, porque a gente quer criar uma grandeza, então acaba se tornando um pouco mais complexo, né? A nossa intenção é se entender também como sócios, criar essa casca, ter essas vivências, saber lidar com essa pressão, é um pouco diferente. Então, até mesmo dentro da startup, a gente vê que o que a gente está criando não está sendo voltado para gerar riqueza, a cultura interna, e, querendo ou não, isso é um pouco do que a gente quer aplicar no futuro, né?
Tá. E se vocês tivessem que dar uma dica, um conselho para alguém que está aqui nos assistindo, nos ouvindo, e tivesse a vontade de passar pela mesma experiência que vocês estão passando, o que vocês falariam, assim?
Eu vou dar 2 dicas. Eu vou dar para alguém que vai passar para nós. Por exemplo, se tiver algum pai escutando a gente, o filho também vai passar por esse ponto. Eu acho que a minha irmã teve um papel muito grande nisso, que foi alertar nossos pais de, pô, deixa os meninos criarem, né? Deixa eles criar as asas dele. E foi fundamental, porque no começo a gente sentia aquela restrição, aquele, pô, não, fica um pouco mais embaixo da nossa asa e tudo mais, e hoje está vendo completamente o ganho que está sendo para a gente. Então, a dica que eu dou para, se tiver algum pai, alguém nessa situação, é realmente deixar livre. E, por exemplo, se existisse essa falha financeira, qualquer coisa, tem todo esse ganho por trás que a gente está tendo. E para o pessoal que está no nosso lugar, é o oposto, mas é de quem está escutando do outro lado, de, pô, segue, porque realmente é uma jornada muito, muito legal. A gente tinha tido algumas experiências, eu tinha tido algumas experiências de trabalho internas, e eu sentia muito falta daquele, pô, olhar para um chefe e ter medo de receber uma bronca, alguma coisa assim, de atrasar, sabe? Por exemplo, eu começava a me cobrar muito porque ninguém estava me cobrando demais. Então, é super importante você ter essa experiência por fora. Estava chegando ali no momento que eu ia buscar um estágio que eu não queria nada a ver com o nosso negócio, porque eu queria passar por isso, né? Querendo ou não, existem muitos contatos e iam acabar tornando flexíveis algumas coisas e tudo mais, que não era o que a gente estava procurando para criar esse escudo e etc, né?
Eu acho que vai bem por esse lado. A gente teve esse ponto de vivência em que, né, nossos pais falaram, pô, mas será que empreender, ir para outro ramo, vocês estão na faculdade, vão trabalhar com a gente? Então a gente teve um pouco dessa questão que meu irmão comentou, e realmente não o suporte, mas a conversa com os pais, a forma como eles lidam com isso é de extrema importância para realmente encorajar. E acho que essa talvez seja uma grande palavra, você realmente, assim, ter coragem para sair da sua zona de conforto, né, pensar, seria talvez mais confortável você entrar no negócio da sua família, ou seguir até uma carreira, sair da faculdade, entrar em uma empresa, mas esse sentimento de, pô, vou colocar realmente minha cara para o mundo, vou me arriscar, e se a empresa né, não ter prosperidade, não significa que você fracassou. Até a gente comenta isso, diariamente o que a gente vem aprendendo, tendo novas experiências, sem dúvida nenhuma, isso conta e vai contar muito para né, o nosso futuro, quando a gente realmente for trabalhar com a família.
Puxando um gancho do que meu irmão falou e até relembrando o que o Nick estava falando, de realmente sair dessa zona de conforto, né? A gente poderia olhar muito bem e falar, pô, vamos para o caminho teoricamente mais fácil, que é já estar próximo da família e tudo mais. É o mais fácil, eu acho que a curto prazo, porque voltando àquela história da bicicleta, você não vai ter aprendido a pedalar 100% sozinho, né? Já vai estar ali perto, não vai saber fazer seus próprios curativos e ter as próprias quedas. Então, apesar de não ser o caminho mais fácil agora, eu acho que é um que vai tornar tudo com uma facilidade muito maior depois.
Ótimo, super obrigada, Ricardo e João. Aí a gente está com os resultados aí da pesquisa, né? Então, queria só dar uma pausazinha. Alguém tem alguma dúvida, comentário, ou para a Judy, para o Nick, ou para o Ricardo e para o João? Ou vocês gostariam de ver os resultados da pesquisa? Podemos seguir? Estou vendo aqui no chat se está surgindo alguma coisa. Acho que não. Vamos falar um pouquinho dos resultados da pesquisa, então, de como é que vocês responderam? So, Nick and Judy, back to you guys. So this is what we had in terms of responses here, using the scorecard.
This is pretty phenomenal. I'll just say my initial reaction that so many of you think that you're actually doing this really well and talking about the hard truth. That's remarkable. Oftentimes we don't necessarily see, I wonder if like could be a little bit of a cultural piece, but at least in the US, some families are more reluctant to share the hard truth. So it's great to see that so many of you feel like you're doing that already.
I'd echo what Judy said. It's just striking how many of you are agreeing. And I think coming back to it, the one thing to remind ourselves is the data is all relative, right? And so it may be great for you and it may not be great for others, but I think overall it's striking and encouraging based on our experiences. And for those that are in the red or yellow, I think you potentially have some peers on the call this evening who may be able to help you, or I don't know where Ricardo and Joao scored themselves, but perhaps they'll have some advice for you as well as we go through.
Thank you, guys.
This is also equally striking. It's funny. So Nick and I, we did a similar presentation to a family business group in Asia, a club, and their results were almost the exact opposite of these results. Where when it came time to telling the real hard stories, so much red. Nobody wanted to talk about the hard stories, but they had a lot of structure here. And so it's interesting. So the stories you guys are all doing largely well here, but the structure is where just getting some clearer guidelines and having that cross-generational dialogue sounds like that would be valuable for many of you.
Yeah. Going back to talking about how to sustain entrepreneurship across generations and the importance of it, one of the things that we find is many people, you talk about structures, but people don't know what are the questions to ask, right? What are the structures that we need to put in place? Is it something as simple as how are we going to make decisions about what gets funded? Are we going to fund things? How are we going to fund things? Who's eligible for them? If we fund them, is it equity or debt? What are the benefits beyond financial that we're going to offer? And so my hypothesis is it may be that there could be additional clarity around what those structures could be. And that may help enable more conversations here about the structures that you might need to support these aspiring entrepreneurs.
One small story on that actually just reminds me, we had a client and he had 11 children. And his way of, if you had an entrepreneurial idea, and you wanted funding or you wanted his help in some way, it was just come in, tell me your idea. It was a closed door meeting, and then you would go out and you'd either have approval, you would have potentially some funding or not. well, it was very, very unclear what the expectations are, besides dad kind of judged if it was a good idea or not. And so that they had this idea, everybody thought, like, why is, this one person, the golden son, he keeps coming in and coming out with like boatloads of money and he's taking off and the rest of us are starting here. It just causes a lot of emotional energy that you don't need. So try to get ahead of that.
Okay.
Testing for viability, I think this one's incredibly promising too, that you're actually having that conversation. And it's not just, we want to support you no matter what. It's got to have a business plan first.
Interesting. This is, I think this is one of the hardest ones to do, right? To offer benefits beyond money to support family entrepreneurs. And in my experience, the reason is, how do you calibrate getting an endeavor off the ground versus how do you calibrate having that next generation feel ownership and feel that they've developed it themselves? We're talking a lot about the system level implications, and we're talking a lot about cross-generational communication. But one of the most challenging things I think we've seen is next generation who make it, but who lack the confidence because of how they made it, right? They make it, but they always wonder, did I only make it because I'm from this family? Or did I only make it because my parents gave me money? Or did I only make it because I had a leg up in all of these connections? And that's what makes this one so hard. And frankly, to me, that's why this one's not as surprising, because it's really hard to do well. And it's really unique to each individual situation and each individual person, and how they see themselves and how the family sees them and how the family sees itself as well.
Completely agree. And I love this one too. I'll give an example here because this is a hard one also to get right. How do you give boosts without micromanaging, where all of a sudden you're in, your senior gen is in every single meeting with you. He's meeting the banks, he's meeting like the website developers, he's doing all this stuff, right? Like, how do you kind of give enough space? And one of our client families did this really well. What they actually said is, we're going to set up a quarterly camping trip. So every 3 months, we're going to have a camping trip. We're going to go away for a weekend. It's going to be us, our dad. And the only time he's going to hear about our business idea is during this quarterly camping trip. So he can't see our daily numbers, where we're how we're trending, what we're doing, what the daily fires are that we're putting out. All he can do is we'll give him the high level, big picture, 10,000 foot problem. He might give us a little guidance, and that's great. Because you literally can't go any deeper when you're that high level. And then that ended up being a phenomenal way to kind of get the guidance, but set some time and space expectations. It was really valuable. That way you're getting more of that board level guidance instead of somebody who's sitting there right with you in the day-to-day operations.
Not surprising to see this one more yellow than not. Again, a hard one to manage here, providing space to entrepreneurs to pursue their interests outside of the family business. I'm sure there are many reasons for this. You're a talent. If you're pursuing things outside, why aren't you doing it with our family, right? And how can I support you? The intentions are the best of intentions in many times in these situations. But again, it's encouraging to see more greens and yellows and no reds. And it's also something where I think, coming all the way back to the beginning, these tools are supposed to spark a conversation, and these questions are supposed to spark a conversation. And so starting to see these yellows may help you spark a conversation around, are you giving me too much space? Are you giving me too little space? How can we do this better as a group, better as an entrepreneur, better as a family supporting that entrepreneur? So what fascinating nonetheless.
This one's hard. it's almost the entrepreneurs is almost harder than the entrepreneurs, because if it's in the industry that your senior family members know really well, they're tempted to just, oh no, I wouldn't do it that way, or I tried that back then and that's not how it works, or, but times are changing every single, I think that it's something to keep in mind. And we have, it could also be like, if you ever senior gen who's interested in reading too, we've got this great article that we wrote for Harvard Business Review that is helpful for some senior gens to read, so that they can actually remind themselves, oh, I do need to give you breathing room, because you're responding to different signals in the market, right? You're responding to the current generation, everything around you. You have a new idea. It's going to be different. You're going to do it differently. And there's several real success stories, and you need to the Hermes story, you need the entrepreneurs, people who say, oh, let's not just do horse saddles, but maybe let's do something different, but let's keep in tie with like our ability to mold leather, right? So I think that that's something that many senior generation family members could use a refresher on.
If I could build on that, Judy, it's interesting, and I don't know if funny is the right word, but funny is the word that comes to mind for me here. Many entrepreneurs over time can tend to lose their entrepreneurial spark, right? So that as they're entrepreneurs, they start with a small organization that's nimble and agile and makes quick decisions and can move. And success breeds its own challenges. And here, as they grow and they build an infrastructure and a professional team around them, they can lose that spark, right? And finding ways to give these entrepreneurs breathing room to rekindle that spark, to blow on that ember, to get it going again, can be a challenge, because it challenges the status quo. But it's also where you come from as well. And so, especially if you have intrapreneurs, which we're talking about, entrepreneurs within the family business, this is incredibly important to make sure you create that space, because the best family businesses that we know, the best owners and the best families, find ways to reinvent themselves at the risk of being disrupted by the disruptors. And so, especially here, finding ways to cultivate those entrepreneurs, to blow on those embers, to keep the flame going, is really hard, but really important as well.
I love that, Nick. I remember one family member said to us, they have, 100-year-old business, and they said, we've been disrupted many times in our history. So actually our family member said to us, let's disrupt ourselves before we're disrupted. What ideas do you have?
It's fantastic.
And then of course, Nick and I are both parents. He's got more children than I do, but it's hard to let your family members fail, right? You want to support them and you want them to succeed, but the lesson is, failure is a part of success, right? You can't just coddle or protect people. So sounds like some working pains on this one.
Indeed. We have a saying among our colleagues. We used to say, don't mess it up, tongue in cheek, trying to lighten the mood with people in the room. And we've since, as a group of colleagues, changed it to mess it up and learn something, right? And as I understand the conversation earlier on, learning is success. And I think and we all deeply believe that. And it's time to demystify failing and shift the lens from failure to learning. Because if you're learning from every failure, from every setback, you're going to be better off in the long run. And so figuring out how to do this well is important.
Great. So thank you everyone who actually responded to the poll here live. It really helped us have this conversation and this discussion. And I found it interesting, as Judy and Nick pointed out, how different cultures, like from Asia, from Brazil, for instance, have different responses. It pretty much for me reflected a lot of our culture. So I hope you guys enjoyed this part of the conversation too. So thank you very much, everyone, for being here for this Insper Talks session. I would again like to send a lot of love and appreciation to Judy and Nick for being here with us today. E super muito obrigada para o Ricardo e para o João. Adorei a história de vocês, foi incrível. Espero que tenha inspirado muita gente aqui no grupo. E a todos os participantes, uma boa noite. Nossa, muito obrigada. Bye.
Our pleasure. Thank you all.
Obrigado mais uma vez pelo convite.
Obrigada a vocês. Bye, bye.
Tchau, tchau.
Tchau, tchau.
Tchau, tchau.